Thank you for listening to the Speaking with Confidence podcast. Give us a review to tell everyone why you love the podcast. You can also download, like, and share the podcast with friends. Be sure to visit formingforpublicspeaking.com and sign up for Forming for Public Speaking course. It's a step-by-step system to help you become the confident and powerful speaker you've always wanted to be. Welcome to Speaking with Confidence, a podcast that's here to help you unlock the power of effective public speaking. I'm your host, Tim Newman, and I'm excited to take you on a journey to become a better public speaker. I really appreciate each and every one of our listeners, and thank you for your support. If each of you could do one thing for me, that would be to give us a 5-star review and share the podcast with someone close to you who would benefit from listening. Today's guest is Greg Bennick. Greg is a world-class speaker, best-selling author, film producer, and global event host whose ideas have inspired tens of thousands of people to take new approaches to productivity, focus, inspiration, and personal development. He engages with audiences in conversations that span borders, appearing in 27 countries and counting. His new book is titled Reclaim the Moment: 7 Strategies to Build a Better Now. His documentaries have been winning awards since 2003 and have been screened on all 7 continents. Greg, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited, and I think this is going to be great.
Yeah, me too. You come from a variety of experiences, and I can't wait to get into it and really talk about how, all those experiences really kind of inform, how you deal with people, how you communicate with people, and build relationships. But before we even start getting into that, let's talk about the documentary about Seattle's infamous Teen Dance Ordinance. As I was coming across this, the first thing that hit me before I even really looked into it was you and I are about the same age, and the first thing I thought about was Kevin Bacon and
Footloose.
I just lost the movie. Is Kevin Bacon and
Footloose, yeah.
Footloose, yeah. Talk about the ordinance and how you did this documentary, and your involvement in changing that law so that people could actually have access to the arts in Seattle.
Sure. So the Teen Dance Ordinance was a law that was on the books for many years in the city of Seattle. And it was during a time when there was a panic about morality. And the thought was that dancing would lead to immoral behavior and music would lead to immoral behavior. And basically, the law was created to protect our youth. Now, before I say anything else, everyone wants to protect youth. Everyone wants youth to be safe. There's no one in the world who wakes up in the morning, I hope, and says that they want youth to be in danger or engaged in immoral activities. But in Seattle, it was taken to an extreme. And the Teen Dance Ordinance was a law that was enacted, which made it basically impossible for any concerts or any dances to take place in the city. And my interest was in the concert side of things. There aren't many dances. I mean, that's, something which kind of has disappeared since the 1950s, but concerts were the thing that I was most interested in because I have a background in music and playing in bands.
Mm-hmm.
And when I moved to Seattle, it was at the height of Nirvana's Nevermind album coming out. So we're talking 1991, and the entire world was focused on Seattle as a mecca for music, essentially. But all ages concerts, meaning concerts where anyone could go,
Right.
were illegal in the city, technically. And the law was incredibly restrictive. And my friends and I decided to fight the law. And it was one of these, I fought the law and we won, rather I fought the law and the law won, through an incredible process that involved a number of different people, and certainly not just me. We were able to get that law overturned and replaced with, and this is where the me component comes in, with a law that my friend Dave and I wrote. So the law that exists on the books in the city of Seattle, the All Ages Dance Ordinance, is a law that my friend Dave and I actually wrote and submitted to the city through a long process, and the city passed it. It's a pretty interesting story, and there's been a podcast made about it by a guy named Jonathan Zwickel, and he worked with KUOW and NPR to have his podcast. We could put a link to it, of course, in the show notes. Anybody would be fascinated to hear the story of the Teen Dance Ordinance and how ultimately a law that was designed to protect our youth pushed youth out into the street, into
Right.
dangerous situations, because when there was no concerts to attend, kids had nowhere to go, and they had nothing to do, and when kids have nowhere to go and nothing to do, that's when they might get into trouble. Not will, but might, and it was pretty ironic.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny that, you know, yes, they're trying to protect people, but didn't really even think it through. That's
That's right.
the funny piece, and, on the other side of it, that's also an example of if things aren't right, there's a process to go through and change it to make it right or make it better for not just for you, but for, the community.
Yeah, and what was interesting about the process overall and the takeaway for listeners, because there's very likely listeners who are like, okay, that's great. Seattle's 3,000 miles from me. If I live in Miami or Orlando, why should I care about Seattle? Or I don't go to concerts. I don't go to dances. I don't go to any sort of thing like that. Why should I care? The reason to care is because people can make a difference.
Yes.
We're recording this on election day. And regardless of what side of the aisle you sit on, people can make a difference. So the Teen Dance Ordinance story is one about empowerment and one about community and one about drawing people together. And yes, one about protecting youth, but doing so by way of inviting youth into creative possibilities that they will engage with if you give them the opportunity. So that's
Yeah,
what we were doing.
absolutely. So let's talk about your speaking journey, and, I've heard you tell a story about what is called the pinball incident, um, and how and how that kinda traumatized you, um, and if you wanna get into that's fine, but when did your speaking journey start where you knew that you were going to be good at it? That you really had a message and you could share that message and people received it?
That's a great question. Okay, so there's a couple different angles here. So I'll tell the pinball story,
Mhm.
and it's not so traumatic that I'm going to have to call the therapist as soon as we're done recording. But, the pinball story was instrumental, and basically what happened was that I was a kid, and I mean a little kid, I was maybe 7 or so, I'm not remembering in the moment, but there was a community center near where I lived, and there was pinball machines lined up, and long story short, I was standing in front of the pinball machine without quarters to play because I was a little kid, and I, was standing next to the machine pretending to play, and some older kids came in to the arcade, older, teenagers and whatnot, and they started to come over to this pinball machine where I was standing. I decided to kind of turn sideways and step in between 2 pinball machines, so I'm standing here in between the 2 now, looking at the side of the pinball machine as these older kids surround the machine. Well, they started playing, and I started realizing that I couldn't get out, meaning one way out was into the wall, the other way out was into these big kids, and big kids are scary when you're 6, 7, 8 years old.
Right.
So I didn't know how to get out, but I also was too nervous and shy to ask them to move so I could get out. And I think I was looking up at one of these kids with these wide eyes, not knowing what to do. And he looked down and he's like, "Do you want to get out?" And I was like, "Uh-huh." And they all kind of laughed, and they let me out. Okay. Not too traumatic, but traumatic later in reflection, because while it was intimidating, what I reflected about later on was like, wow, I didn't have a voice at all. In terms of speaking and confidence, I had neither. I couldn't speak. I didn't have the confidence to speak.
Mhm.
I couldn't get out of that situation. And it was really an intimidating moment that I reflected on quite often later in life. And, my mom was a speaker. My mom is a very gifted communicator. And growing up, my mom was always speaking, either when she was an aerobics instructor and in class inspiring people to push themselves past their physical limits, or she would talk about exercise to different organizations. And she was always inspiring. But I never heard her speak until later in life. I'll get into that story in a bit. But I realized early on that I had a propensity and ability to speak when I was in middle school-ish, and I was joining, debate clubs and debating and whatnot, and speaking extemporaneously, like I'm doing right now, came very easy to me. It wasn't hard to put thoughts together and form cohesive structure to arguments and whatnot, and I thought, "Wow, this is kinda cool. I'm kinda good at this," and it was all genetic, so I think basically, I thank my mom for paving the way, so thank you, mom, but if we have a chance in the podcast, I'd be happy to tell the story the first time I saw my mom speak, which was much, much later in life and was mind-boggling. She was quite amazing.
Yeah, tell a story about your mom because you know I think sometimes the my audience is essentially young professionals. They don't really they haven't really given it a whole lot of thought about things that have shaped them or who they are or um, the power that people close to us, such as parents or guardians or mentors, really have. And when we see, like you being a little bit older in life, we how you really treasure and reflect back on how important those people are and what they've actually taught us.
So, I'll tell you the story of my mom. She, was living in Virginia. My parents were living in Virginia at the time, in a rural community, and I was coming to visit them, and my mother said, I mean, all 5'1" of her, I think she's shorter now, 4'11" or so, but anyway, all 5 feet of my mom was saying, "I'm so happy that you're gonna be here. I have a speaking engagement." And I thought, "Great, I've never actually seen you
Mhm.
speak. I've seen you talk. I've heard you talk about speaking. I've never seen you speak." And she said, "Well, it's sold out, but I can get you in." I thought, "Sold out? What are you even talking about is sold out?" So, it was indeed sold out. It was at the local hospital. There was 150 or 200 tickets available at $1.50 or $2 each, and they had sold them all. And my mom was speaking on exercising as we age. So the date of the event comes, we go to the event, my mother's, like, walking around and waving at all of her friends and just being cute and amazing and just fun and lighthearted and whatnot. And I'm in the back of the room watching these people pour in, and it was standing room only for my mom. And they introduced her. She walks to the front of the room and they said, "Please welcome," and she's waving at her friends, "Please welcome Diane Bennick." And she turned around to this audience after literally 5 seconds before waving at her friends and said, "If you don't exercise as you age, your peers and friends are gonna read about you in the newspaper when they find you at the bottom of the stairs." Now, okay,
Wow.
what you need to realize is that her audience was all senior citizens. It was people in their 70s, 80s, and 90s, and my mom's opening line is, "If you don't exercise, your bones will be weak, you'll fall down the stairs and die, and they'll read about you in the paper." I thought, "Oh my gosh, what is even happening here?" She proceeds to do 90 minutes of a combination of fun stories, intensity. It was like literally 4 feet and 11 inches of my mom as Tony Robbins and drill sergeant combined, and at the end, every single person in that room was ready to do sit-ups and push-ups, including me. It was unreal, and at the end of 90 minutes, she thanks the audience, starts waving at her friends, walks off the stage, and goes back to being mom. Incredible. And I thought to myself, "Oh, wow. Okay. All my years on stage and bands and with a microphone in my hand all of a sudden makes sense." That's where I got it from. So it's all mom's doing.
That's amazing. It really is. So my wife is short. She's 4'7". She says she's 4'9". She's not. She's 4'7". And when you have somebody of that stature, right? That physical stature, and they can command a room like that at the drop of a hat, that is it's amazing, it's eye-opening, and it's really powerful. Very
Well, it's
powerful.
amazing. Presidential candidates, not to even bring today into it, but
Mhm,
presidents and presidential candidates and CEOs are often tall, right?
mhm.
We equate height with power, and it's ridiculous. I mean, my mom is this shorter, less height-filled person. I don't know the best way to say it.
Right.
She's not very tall, and she commanded that room. She commanded that room with ideas and impact and power. Anybody, including me, who had underestimated her going in, certainly didn't make that mistake again.
And, it's so important. Like you said, she commanded with ideas, and if it doesn't matter how smart you are, if you can't communicate your ideas, it just doesn't matter. You
It's
could have the
true.
you could have the best ideas, but if you can't communicate it, you're gonna be at the
Well,
bottom.
it's interesting that you mentioned that because years ago, I produced a documentary, called The Philosopher Kings. It was put out by a film company called Transcendental Media from Southern California, and The Philosopher Kings was about wisdom seen through the eyes of custodians at
Mm,
prestigious American universities. So as a producer, my job was to find custodians who had a compelling story and the ability to tell it. So I called Dartmouth, Princeton, Yale, Harvard, you get the idea,
mhm.
MIT and whatnot. and I asked to speak to members of their custodial staff to find out who had the most insight and wisdom and impact, along with a story they could communicate clearly. Well, there was a combination of responses. There were people with amazing stories who couldn't communicate them, and people with completely mundane stories who could communicate them wildly. Neither of which is what we were looking for. We were looking for the magical combination of both.
Right.
And out of interviewing 40 to 60 people, I can't remember how many exactly it was. I mean, there were people who would, I would get on the phone, they'd be all dramatic. I'm so excited to tell you this story. The biggest operative moment of my entire life was when I put staples in that stapler. It was so great. I'm like, wait a minute, what?
What?
And then there were other people who would say things like, yeah, and then, after I guess, climbed Mount Everest, you know, I whatever, it was cool. And, wait a minute, Everest? It was cool? Wait, whoa, 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 whoa. So I had
Back
to
up.
find the people who had a
Right.
compelling story and the dynamic voice to tell it, because whether you are taller, whether you're shorter, whether this or this condition exists in your life, having the ability to speak and speak effectively with strength and clarity is really powerful, and
It
it's
really is.
something to most definitely cultivate.
Mhm. And again, it takes practice. It's not something, well, for most people, it takes practice. It's not something that just happens and takes, um, it takes work and takes time. But
I agree.
let's shift gears and talk about some actionable things that our audience can do. And I got your book, and people that know me know when I buy a book, I've got a real problem. I don't read the book from start to finish. I open it up and I find a chapter. Oh, I think I'm going to start here. And then I'm going to jump over to here. And I'm going to jump over to here. And so you didn't tell me to start from the beginning and read through. So I didn't. I started at chapter 9, where you talk about building relationships. For me, I think with all the talk of AI that we hear nonstop every day, to me, it's still about relationships. And I don't care, no matter what happens, everything that we do is going to come down to personal relationships. And if we can't build personal relationships, we're not going to be successful. And, I say that, if we can't do this, you're not going to be successful. If you can't do that, you're not going to be successful. And it really does take, I think, a combination of all of these things to do that. So, talk a little bit about relationships, um, but how do we go about building strong relationships? Because again, that doesn't just happen. We don't just, you know, okay, met you today, and all of a sudden, we're best buds. How do you go about building strong relationships?
I think one of the most important things is to pay attention to people. I think in an increasingly distracted world, paying attention to people matters.
Mhm.
And I talk about this in the book that we want to feel as though we matter, as though we are valuable contributors to something meaningful. And when we can allow somebody to feel that or help or inspire someone to feel that, we're going to make a stronger connection with them. If I just sit here
Mhm.
and talk at you like you are pixels on a screen, you're going to know it. You're going to feel it. There's going to be no bond and no connection. But if I'm listening to you, paying attention to you, and really actually willing, excited, and able and just diving into connecting with you, you're going to know it and you're going to feel it.
Yeah.
Okay, does that mean we have to do that with every single person we meet? It's going to be challenging. But if we keep applying that mindset to our connections with people, we're going to build stronger relationships. It's just going to happen when
Mhm.
we pay attention to people, when we listen to what they're saying, when we listen between the words, when we offer insight into what might support, help, or elevate them, not because there's something in it for us, but because the relationship will be stronger as a result. We create space for possibility. Ultimately, that's what the entire book is about. It's about creating space for possibility.
Yeah.
And we do that certainly through relationships. So I think an actionable point is pay attention to people, connect with them by paying attention to them and helping them feel as though they matter, because hopefully in the moment that you're connecting with them, they do, they matter to you. And if they do, they're going to feel that.
You're 100% right. And you said something. You said the word listening a couple of times, and I think listening is something that is so often overlooked. And again, we're doing this on election day, right? And not to get political, but we are so divided, and the left doesn't ever listen to the right doesn't ever listen to the left. And my issue is, if you would just listen to the other side, you may learn something. you may actually, you know, get an understanding of why they think this or why they think that or why they want to do whatever. But listening in terms of building relationships, like you said, not listening so that you can respond, but listening to understand and listening to what whoever's talking, what they actually mean is so important.
I agree with you. Years ago, not too many years ago, about 10 years ago, I did a spoken word tour, speaking tour of Ukraine and Russia. And it had never been done before. I don't think anyone's done it since. I can't imagine anyone's going to do it now. But I did 21 dates of speaking across Ukraine and Russia. And while I was in Russia, every night, as part of what I did, I was explaining to people that growing up in the United States, we always thought that the Russians were going to bomb us if we
Mhm.
turned our backs on them. And every single night, audiences across Russia, from all the way in the West to all the way in the East, thought that was the most ridiculous thing they'd ever heard. And people would say, "What are you talking about? We didn't want to bomb you. You wanted to bomb us." And we would sit there and have a moment of realization in which it came quite clear that fear mongering and the messages we were receiving all along from the news, from politics and whatnot, had created in us an inability to see the
Yes.
other than as an enemy. And that's exactly along the lines of what you said, what we have going on in the United States right now, to the
Yep.
point where we cannot even say the word politics without a disclaimer. The one you offered, for example, I would have
Mhm.
done the same thing, not to get political, but hey, let me make this point because we want to soften the blow in case we come across as adversarial. Realistically, the Russians thought it was ridiculous that
Yeah.
we thought they wanted to bomb them. I mean, but if you were, alive in the '80s or the '90s, you absolutely thought that this was the case.
We
So the point is more the '80s and earlier, but the point is that there's a lot of room to make connections, tons of room to make
Mhm.
connections. We just have to find common ground beyond what the media is serving us every single day.
Yeah, and well, I would say part of that is turn the TV off. Turn the TV off, put your phone down, put social media away, and actually have a conversation with a real human person.
Yep, absolutely. I have a good friend who lives in Michigan. He and I couldn't be farther apart on this political spectrum. Like we literally were voting for two different people today for two completely different reasons, and the platform points that we're voting on are completely different. I read his posts on social media, and I want to write to him and say, "Come on now." You don't really believe that, do you? And of course he doesn't, because he's repeating what he's been told. Just as if I was to type out the party line of my voting choices, I'm repeating what I've been told. What I
Mhm.
would love to do sometime, and I plan to, is sit down with him and just say, "Hey, let's talk about these things." Like, not with our friends around, not with our phones on, not because we're going to post about this, not because we're recording it. Let's actually talk about it. Because one thing I've learned, I mention all the time in my introductions, Greg Bennick's 27 countries, spoken in 27 countries. Hooray. What have I learned from the 27 countries? I've learned, and I write about this in the book, that ultimately we all want the same thing. We want to know that we matter, yes, and that we're
Yes.
vital contributors to something meaningful. We want our kids to be safe. We want to be healthy. We want a roof over our head. We want to have something to eat. We want to have clean water. Go to Haiti, be in the
Yes.
jungle. Go to Siberia. Go anywhere in Europe. Go to Japan, anywhere, and ask people, what do you really want? What do you really want most? And if they're away from their boss or their spouse, their kids, whatever, their parents, they're going to say basically what I just said. I don't know. I just want a safe place to live. I want to be able to afford the things that I want. I want to be healthy. I want my kids healthy. I want, clean water in a lot of places I've been to. There are commonalities and points through which we can make connections with basically everyone on this planet if we're willing to look and do the work to find those things and then make those connections.
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, you nailed it. You're exactly right. You know, I haven't been around the world nearly as much as you have, but the places I've been, that's that's it. You nailed it. And it doesn't matter. The all walks of life in different countries as well. Same thing.
That's it. In various forms, right? In various
Right.
forms. You're gonna talk to people and get different answers, but they're all gonna be in that same wheelhouse, meaning,
Yep.
people in Seattle today are not thinking to themselves, "I need to have clean water." Well, that's because the water here is clean. Go talk to folks in Flint, Michigan, and they're going to say clean water, but the connection is the same. We want clean water, whether we
Right.
have it already or we need it. That's just a thing that we need. There's points and ways to connect with people that we often do away with. And we should be doing less of the doing away, especially during times like these, and finding those points of connection.
Exactly. I don't think I've ever talked to anybody that says, you know what, I don't want clean air. Don't want it. Don't
Yeah,
want clean water. Can't. Nah.
exactly. Exactly. Yeah. These things aren't important to me. I want the world to blow up in a firestorm of pollution. That would,
Exactly.
really make my day.
It's but yeah, well, we'll move on from there. You know, it's it's crazy. What we think when we have our TV on and we're looking at social media and we get caught up in in that. But anyway, so what do you mean by being the driver of relationship culture instead of simply being a passenger?
Well, I think exactly what we've been talking about, right? If you're a passenger in relationship culture, you're going to end up falling in line with what you're sold, what you're offered, and what you're told. And I'm entirely convinced that we can do better than that. I'm
Mhm.
entirely convinced we can do better than that. Meaning, I'm entirely convinced that the ways to connect with people that are offered to me by liking their posts, by commenting on their posts, by sharing their posts are a start, but they're not the ending point. That's, if we want to be drivers of relationship culture, we need to reach beyond just click, like, click, share, click, comment. We need to actually make connections. And that doesn't necessarily mean throw out your social media. It means that even in using social media, there's ways to connect more thoroughly and concretely with people, and I think that that's a way to be a driver, is to actually use social media and use the affordances that we
Yeah.
have today to actually make deeper connections with people. I think that the connections that we have are superficial when we're passengers, and when we're driving relationships and connection, we take the time to listen, we take the time to pay attention, we take the time to ask questions. I think it's really important to do.
Yeah, and it's funny you say that. I spent some time on LinkedIn today. Um, I'll funny story here in a second, but as I was scrolling through, I saw a post from somebody who I hadn't connected with in probably about 6 or 7 months, and all I did was open up direct message, send them 2 or 3 sentences. "Hey, I want to let you know you saw you came across my feed. Hope you're doing well. Let's catch up next week sometime. Give
Mhm.
me a call." And
Good
it's
work.
those things that, because we all get busy in life. We all have our own stuff going on and things
I
fall through
agree.
the cracks. But, again, using social media for ways to connect and keep those relationships strong are important.
I agree with you, and I think it's important, yeah, to not consider social media the end, but a beginning point.
Yeah, exactly. So when I was on LinkedIn, I had reached out to a colleague to be a guest on the show
Mhm.
in September, and he said, and this is all through direct message. He said, I'm really booked up in October. Contact me in November. I said, great, awesome, perfect. So it's November. So I went back to the direct message. I was just going to reply to that, and the algorithm was I'm going to pull up just so that I can
Mhm.
not make any mistakes. And as I say this, there was um, a safe content message in his reply after I had already replied, awesome, great. It said, if the content in this message is unwanted or harmful, please report it to us. And I'm thinking, you've got to be kidding me. This is where we are. you know, there was everything in that whole exchange was positive. I mean, there was nothing in there that you could ever even um, consider negative or harmful or attacking anybody.
Right.
And it came after I said, awesome. I'll reach out to you then. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. First and foremost, if everybody's listening, if I reach out to you and you can't do it, you're not interested, it's okay to say no. I'll be okay.
Yeah.
I won't need therapy. We'll be
Yeah.
okay. But but that's really kind of where we are, I guess. Um, I just thought it was just completely bizarre. That's the first time I've ever seen anything like that. Anyway,
Well, I mean, there's so many pitfalls in our communication on social media, and so many things that can be misconstrued and misunderstood from
yeah,
our standpoint in terms of what we type, what we don't, what we leave out, what is nuanced, what nuanced spaces we don't fill. But also remember that when engaging in social media, we've made an agreement to play by the rules of the
yes,
social media giant with whom we're interacting. I mean, people all the time post this ridiculous thing saying, I don't give Facebook or Instagram the right to use my photos, and I claim sovereignty over my own space. It's like, no, you don't. The
no,
second
you
you
don't
signed up, you give away all that. You're playing by their rules, and their rules don't necessarily facilitate amazing communication. That's up to people to do. It's up to us to engage in ways that are vital and valuable. We have to do that. The platform is not going to do that for us, whether that's Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok. We have to make connections.
exactly, exactly. And that kind of leads me into the next chapter. If anybody knows me, I went from chapter 9 right to chapter 8, which is laughter. Because yeah, I'm a big believer in, you know, I don't take myself very seriously at all, but I take what I do seriously. And
Good.
in my daily life, I use self-deprecating humor, make fun of myself. It's really it really is okay. Um, and I saw that your list of movies that you listed in there that you thought were funny, but you listed one that I'd never heard of. It was the Grand Budapest Hotel. What's that movie? And do I really need to put that on my list?
Okay, so I mentioned movies like The Big Lebowski. I mentioned Elf. I mentioned Office Space,
Mhm.
all of which I think are hysterically funny.
They
The
are.
Grand Budapest Hotel is a Wes Anderson film, and it's not laugh out loud, ridiculous funny the way that some of those others are. I mean, if you watch Elf, you're just gonna be laughing at how ridiculous it is.
Mhm.
Grand Budapest Hotel is more sophisticated, more well-written, expertly, amazingly shot and filmed. I highly, highly recommend it. You're gonna watch it, and what's funny about it is more it's so clever at times. You're gonna say, "Wow, that's really funny," but not like the laugh out loud, hysterical laughter that you might, experience when you're watching the dude in The Big Lebowski.
Mhm.
So I would highly recommend, The Grand Budapest Hotel.
All right, so that's going on the list because that's I like every one of those other movies for those same reasons, but I also like that those clever movies too because those are
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, Grand
those are
Budapest
great.
Hotel isn't ridiculous. It's brilliant. It's just brilliant, and it is funny. It's funny in its own way all throughout, but it's not necessarily a comedy the way that those other comedies are structured.
Mhm. So I don't know if you saw this, but recently, James Caan did an interview where they were actually talking about Elf, and he didn't get it. He didn't get Will Ferrell at all. So his reactions in the movies was real, and it wasn't till the end of the movie after everything was done and shot, and he saw the movie that's when he got it. So that was those were real reactions.
That's awesome. I
Isn't it
love it.
great? That's
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 so great. Because all throughout, the word that describes him, he's, like, incredulous, like, he has no idea what's happening, like, "What is this? Who are you? Why? What's happening?" And if he didn't get it when they were filming, that's even better. I love it.
yeah.
I hope they didn't even give him a script. That's fantastic.
That's amazing. How do you incorporate laughter in your presentations and your leadership style? Because again, you're traveling all over the world, and I had a conversation with somebody today. We have to be respectful of cultures and this and what we say. But how do you incorporate laughter and humor in your presentations and leadership style?
Absolutely. You have to turn it inward, right? You can't go into somebody else's culture, somebody else's space, and make fun of them and expect that you're gonna look better as a result. It's just not how it works. So, I think you have to turn it inward. You have to be willing to poke fun at yourself, your condition, your circumstances, why you're there, what you're speaking about, the circumstances that your audience might relate to. Those are ways that to build connections, certainly. And those are ways that you're gonna be able to, increase the laughter content of what you have going on. I mean, when people are looking at themselves and looking at you per se, or me, as the case may be, um, as somebody who is worth being critical of in a supportive way, you're going to find common ground and be able to laugh at that. So
Hmm.
I think that one thing is to not think of punchlines that have your audience as the punchline, because in a live setting, that's never going to work.
Right.
It will work, but I mean, to a certain degree, and then the audience is going to say, okay, enough already. As long as you're willing to put yourself, and I write about this in the book, put yourself as the punchline in a way. And I think that goes a long way. I also when I'm performing, when I'm speaking and doing these keynote presentations, I incorporate elements of, say, a juggling trick, a magic trick, a balancing trick, something they don't expect. So people are like, whoa, that's ridiculous and funny. I couldn't have anticipated that he was going to balance a chair on his face. I couldn't have anticipated he was going to make his point about focus while juggling a machete. That came out of left field. Those sorts of things become funny because the circumstances are so unusual. So and none of them require that I use somebody as a punchline, but rather it's just the circumstances of the event being outlandish at times that become funny. So that's a good approach to take.
Yeah, and you know, I love the stories that you tell in the book. They're great. Um, you juggled a leg. Um, the the I want to talk about Dalai Lama, but not yet.
Okay.
Okay, so I think I've already gave it already gave it away. Anyway, the
Let me explain
this
to viewers and listeners real quick
okay.
that I was at a performance, in Montana, I think it was, and I have a moment in my show. At the time, I was doing a comedy show, and I have a moment where I was juggling objects that the audience suggested. And I'm gonna cut to the chase and give away sort of the punchline of the story, which is that somebody in the audience held up their own prosthetic leg and said, basically, "Juggle this." And I juggled this young man's leg, and the audience went wild, and this young man went even wilder with joy that I was doing this. So when you casually say just now, "You juggled the leg," it's not like I removed somebody's severed leg in the midst of a traumatic injury, but rather somebody quite willingly gave me their leg and said, "Juggle this."
And that's it's awesome and it's funny and you know, being able to tell that story too, right? And when you talk about um, focus and doing those types of things, and that's you're doing it to make the point that it doesn't really matter as long as you're focused on whatever it is
Mhm.
you can do those things. Like
Right.
I watched your juggling videos and I tried it. It's going to take some practice because
Yeah.
the videos that you put up there are honest to God the first time I've ever really seen easy directions on how to juggle.
Oh, I'm so happy. I'm so very happy about this. This is great. This is great.
So
And if people are interested, you know, there's a secret website, as it were, for readers of my book. And if people are interested in my book, of course, you're more than welcome to buy it and read a copy. But gregbennick.com/reclaim has these videos that I reference in the book with lessons on how to juggle. But also there's a few extra stories in there that are very unusual. There's videos describing some unusual stories that you might enjoy.
yeah, and they're they're amazing stories. Um, and we'll talk about one here in a little bit. You know, you talk about you know using laughter or humor or other things, and you're on a train in India. You're the only American. You've got a battalion of military on the train with you. You're sitting next to an Indian family, and everybody's staring at you. You know that's it's got to be unnerving. You know, I talk about to my audience a lot. Don't worry about what other people are doing, looking at you, whatever. Okay, you got a battalion of military and a family staring at you. At that point, it's okay to start worrying about why everybody's staring at you and what you're
It
going
was
to do.
unreal.
Tell that story and how you built connections, how you actually
Sure.
you know broke the ice and you know dare I say made friends or made
Absolutely.
you without giving the story away. I'll let you tell the story.
No, I'm happy to tell it. Basically, I was on a train in India. I was by myself, and I had I had a long train ride, and a family got on the train, and this was a train that was empty, basically. Imagine bench seats, essentially. A family got on the train, mother, father, two kids, and they were sitting across from me. As is the case in India, it's sort of the custom, the social norm, is they started staring at me. And they weren't saying anything. I wasn't saying it to them. They were just staring. So amidst that, it was uncomfortable for me because it's not the social norm for me to be stared at. Well, at the next train stop, or soon thereafter, an entire, as you said, battalion of Indian military personnel got on the train with guns and bullets and hand grenades and rocket launchers, and they were on their way to some military training. They all packed this train. So now it's not just me and a family of four, it's me, a family of four, and basically the entire Indian army, and they are all heavily armed, and they start staring at me. So now I've not just got two little kids and two parents staring at me from, 3 feet away, but everywhere I look around me are heavily armed men just staring. So it was very awkward. Well, at the time, I was making my living as a street performer and performer, and I happened to have in my pocket, and I don't have any around here anywhere, some balloons like you blow up to make an animal balloon dog with. Well, I had to break the ice. The oppressive and intense stare of all these probably very kind people was overwhelming. So I pulled out a balloon out of my pocket and inflated this balloon to make a dog balloon for one of these kids. And the second I did, this family and these Indian army humans lost their minds. And I ended up making balloons not just for the family, I ended up making balloons for all the Indian army guys. And when the Indian army guys got off the train, instead of staring, now they're waving and they're, holding a gun in one hand and they're waving in the other with the balloon in their hand. And the balloons were a mechanism by which I made connections with people in very unusual circumstances to me. And again, the point is, what do we have in common, right? I
Right.
mentioned before, what do we have in common with people around the world? In this case, it was, what do we have in common? Well, balloons are cool. Fun is cool. I like fun, to quote Alf. To quote Elf, I like fun. I like smiling. I think it sounds like smiling. I can't remember the exact quote, but the point is we like to have a good time. So let's have a good time and just see what happens because that will transcend our language barriers and our social custom barriers. And that's exactly what happened on that train.
And you just said smiling, and it triggered something for me. Smiling is a universal language. It's
Mhm.
a universe. I've got a 3-month-old grandson
Mm,
that just got baptized this past weekend, and my my family knows my I talk about my grandkids all the time now. Now that I've got grandkids,
yeah,
um, and he doesn't know anything, but if you look at him and smile, he's going to smile, right? That's what
yeah,
that's what they do. I mean,
yep,
if and go anywhere in the world, if you smile at somebody, and more than likely they're going to smile back.
that's right.
That's a universal language, and you know, so you break the ice with something fun, start smiling, and then it takes over the whole train, takes over a whole battalion of
That's right.
soldiers.
And even if the person you smile at doesn't smile back, they likely are not gonna interpret your smile as antagonism.
Right.
Whereas if you're staring somebody down, they might. But, with a smile, you can certainly break the ice more often than not.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think again, getting back to the audience of young professionals, I think a lot of times that they get so hung up in their own inner talk and inside their own head that they lose or they can't come up with the idea of just to relax and be yourself.
Uh-huh,
Relax and have fun. I mean,
uh-huh.
because when you're out with your friends or what have you, you're gonna have fun. I mean, if you're by yourself, the only way you know to not be stared at is to relax and have fun
Yeah,
and just
and,
be you.
I think it's important. I think that oftentimes one thing that's I think is true, at least for me, is that I get in my head and I think to
Yeah,
myself, "Oh, I wonder what that person's intentions are. I wonder where the," and one of the reasons, one of the chapters of my book is believe in the possibility of kindness, is to assume and believe the best in other people in order to create space for possibility through a relationship that might develop with them. And I think that when we think the worst of people or we automatically assume negative intentions in people, we close the door on possibility.
And you bring up the possibility of kindness, and that leads me to the talk about the Dalai Lama. You know, um, you spent some time in India. Your friend had to go home, and so you decide you were actually looking for a prayer bowl, right? That's what it was,
Yeah,
a
it
prayer
was. I
bowl?
was looking for a singing bowl, the type of bowl where
Mhm.
you draw a piece of wood around the periphery of the bowl. It makes this sort of ambient, interesting, haunting sound through resonance.
And you head north to I almost said Indiana.
Yeah, a
Yeah.
Dharamsala in India and McLeod-Ganj.
In
Yeah,
India, not Indiana, India. Um, and the Dalai Lama holds, I guess,
public
meetings,
audience. Yeah,
a public audience, and you had the opportunity to shake the Dalai Lama's hand. Tell that
yeah, I
story,
did.
because to me, that again, my went, phew. I had no idea that was even possible. Really.
Yeah, it was, I was in the north of India. My friend had had to fly home because she was sick with, dysentery, and I went to the north of India by myself and, just walked around this village, which at the time was just a village. I think that McLeod-Ganj is more developed now, but at the time it was just a village, and I walked around and ate food and talked to monks and just, walked in the woods and did my thing, but the Dalai Lama held public audience from time to time, and what that, consisted of was that people who had walked from all over Asia in order to get to India and all over that part of the world in order to get to India were able to wait outside the Dalai Lama's residence for him to come out, and then we would have a chance to greet him. So I waited for hours and hours and hours and hours with people who had walked hundreds of kilometers in order to get there. And this is after waiting weeks for him to have the public audience. I happened to have a schedule that allowed for that at the time. And, the Dalai Lama eventually comes out onto his front porch, and I swear, I mean, when I saw the man, I thought he was glowing. I mean, he has just an aura about him. He's really just a really powerful presence, whether I imagine that or not, and imagine the aura or not. And, one by one, you walk up to the monk next to the Dalai Lama, and there's a moment of greeting. Then you're able to greet the Dalai Lama, shake hands with the Dalai Lama, and then go on to the next monk next to him and then leave. That whole process took about a minute, but the entire process, capital P process, took hours and hours and hours and hours. We were out there for
Mhm.
hours waiting, but I did have a chance to meet him, and I said, "I wish you my best always for you and your people." Tashi Delek, which is a generally nice thing to say in Tibetan, and he smiled and shook my hand, and it was a very powerful moment for me, just because this is a person revered around the world,
Mhm.
and he was very humanized in that moment. So one of the lessons and takeaways from it was just to remember that people are indeed, people, as, I think it was Depeche Mode said maybe decades ago,
Yeah.
"People are people," and I think that, the Dalai Lama as a person, and he has been most vocal in talking about himself as indeed a person. It was really nice to connect and see this amazing and wonderful person who is the embodiment of kindness, for many people, face to face. It was really quite wonderful.
Yeah, I can't even imagine, to when even when the Pope comes and the Pope travels around, nobody's getting close to the Pope.
No, he's in a Pope mobile. The Dalai Lama doesn't have a Dalai Lama mobile, as I remember, with bulletproof glass.
Yeah, and you got to talk to him, you got to shake his hand, um, and, nobody's probably gonna get this, but I'm hoping he wished you total consciousness. But anyway, but it's I joke with on that, but, that's one of the most famous people, and one of the people that is really, we should mold our lives after.
Uh-huh.
Peace, kindness, you know, understanding, all those things that we talk about. He is the embodiment of that. And again, you had an opportunity, to meet him, and I wish, more people could emulate those types of characteristics.
Well, I agree with you. And like I said, one of the chapters in the book being called Believe in the Possibility of Kindness is subtitled To Escape the Trap of Pessimism. Because when we assume, as I said before, when we assume the worst in other people, we become pessimistic. That pessimism grows, it creates antagonisms, it creates divisions between people. And when we imagine the possibility, just the possibility that other people might be kind, it creates space for
Yeah.
possibility. I think that creates space for possibility for growth, for development, for work to get done and it's all starts with us. So I think it's really important to remember kindness.
And that story even has another step to it because you got it was a red string or red,
Yeah, there's a
um
prayer string that you're given basically, and it's knotted to symbolize a prayer, a mantra of sorts that the Dalai Lama followers of the Dalai Lama would recognize.
mhm,
And when I got back to the United States, I was in a Tibetan restaurant in Salt Lake City, Utah, and I walked in and the staff was basically closing. It was towards the end of the lunchtime. They were like, "Hey, sit anywhere." And I had this string wrapped around my neck with this knot in it symbolizing, the Dalai Lama essentially. And when I pulled it out and showed it to this family of Tibetan people who owned this restaurant, they were in awe. There was an instant connection made there over a cord, but the cord was a symbol. And the symbol was of something we shared in common. That's the most important thing to remember is if we have divisions at work, if we're having trouble in human resources, if we can't connect with other people, we have to dig deeper and find connection points. We have to dig deeper and remember what base level things do we have in common? That's the way through.
exactly, exactly, because going back to it, we all want the same things.
We do. We just wanna have our kids safe, we wanna be healthy, and but more importantly, we wanna feel as though we matter and that we're vital contributors to something meaningful.
Yeah. Have you ever talked to anybody and they said that they don't wanna be successful?
Um Yeah, I have. People
Really?
who to whom success doesn't necessarily matter, they're just happy. They're happy raising their kids. They're happy, going about their day. People who don't necessarily it's not that they don't wanna be successful. They don't wanna be ambitious to reach the next level. They're happy where they are, right?
Well, I would
But
even
that's
I would say that that's success, that they've reached
and I
success.
agree with you. I agree with you. I'm going off the societal idea of, success being ambitious achievement. But yeah, I think what I could answer more concisely is to say everyone wants to be successful on that level, whether the success is embodied in the car they drive or the kids they raise. People wanna have a healthy, happy life. So,
Mhm.
yes, people all across the board wanna be successful in that regard.
It and I asked that question, I mean, 'cause that's chapter 7, and for whatever reason, I ended up going backwards in your book, but to me, success is whatever the individual says it is. You know, if if you wanna spend your life working all the time, not have a family, and that's what you wanna do, good for you. If you wanna
Right.
have a family, good for you. If you wanna work in nonprofits, good for you. If you wanna help the homeless, good whatever success is. I've never based on that, I've never talked to anybody who says that they don't wanna be successful. If
Right.
you wanna
I
live on the
agree.
beach if you wanna live on the beach and go surfing every day, if that's all you wanna do, and that's what you're doing, good for you.
Yeah, and that's success. And that with that definition, those parameters, yes, I agree with you. Everyone wants that for sure.
So why do we as individuals put up these barriers so that we can't be successful or aren't successful? The self-talk of, whatever it is, um, I can't do it because of this, or, I don't have that, so I'm not going to do this, whatever it is. To me, it seems like we are our own worst enemies in terms of reaching the success that we want to have.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that sometimes we are intimidated by the idea of success. I mean, I mentioned that in the in the chapter in my book called "Leap into the Dark," which is an idea around leaping into the unknown and just seeing what happens. And you might just succeed, but we're often afraid of succeeding. What happens if this podcast is successful and gets 1 million listeners tomorrow? What? How does that change my life? And then what's that going to do? What happens if 100 million people hear this? Oh my goodness, well, then I'm gonna have to, get new, shirts and, get better glasses, my whole life is gonna change. Oh my goodness. maybe I should just keep things the way they are. Well, by fearing success, we often don't take chances. And I think that there's room for possibility that we would love to embrace if we're willing to leap into the dark. So I think that that's part of it. And I think that that's what that chapter is about. Oftentimes, we can be intimidated by fear of failure, but we can also be intimidated by fear of success.
Yeah. And fear of failure to me is just as bad.
Absolutely, for sure. Because I mean, you might not try something. You
Mhm.
might not try to connect with somebody you want to connect with. You might not try to try something new that you might enjoy, a new hobby, a new skill. You might not bring up an idea at work that'll lead to a transformative moment for you, your team. All those things are geared and not geared, but led by fear of fear of failure.
Yeah, yeah. You know, I was with my grandkids this past weekend, and we took them to this place in Baltimore. It's called Port Discovery, and they have this one slide where you have to climb up. It's kind of like a rope ladder all the way to the top of the building, and then you slide down. And my 4-year-old granddaughter, she jumped in the first one and the first area, and she says she needs help. I said, "No, you can do it. You can do it." And once you get to that second level, it's a lot easier to keep going. And she struggled getting up to that first level, and then she made it all the way up to the top. I was petrified for her, because I was, afraid she's going to get hurt, but she loved it. Was she didn't allow, you know other people's fears or her own fear to stop her from trying something. And I think that's something that, as we get older, we start to do that to ourselves again. It's not necessarily society. It's um, we start telling ourselves, "Well, I better not do that." Maybe it's because Pop said, "Oh, be careful. You may not want to do that." Maybe that is our fault, right? Maybe that's the parents' fault or whatever. But as kids, they have no fear, and
Yeah,
I hope that, you know I would hope that they could have no fear to do the things that they need to do to be successful would carry on. But for whatever
right.
reason, we have those self-limiting beliefs that stop that.
Yeah, and I think that self-limiting beliefs take the form of fear of success and fear of failure both. It's not just that we're afraid of failing, we're also sometimes afraid of succeeding, which can be equally intimidating.
Yeah,
And,
yeah,
when we create space for possibility, as I talk about in the book, we're creating space for opportunities beyond fear of defeat, beyond fear of success. We're just trying to move forward in a way that doesn't create stagnation, which I think is the option, unfortunately, that's open to us when we're afraid of succeeding or of failing. I think
yeah,
that we have the potential to stagnate.
yeah. I agree. I Is there anything else in the book that we need to talk about before we?
I would say, I mean, we covered kindness, keep your eyes on the knife. We covered the idea of leaping into the dark and engaging with laughter and relationships. I mean, there's lots of other ideas in the
Yeah,
book. I tried to pack it full of stories and fun, but also ideas and actionable steps that people can take to make for better relationships and more advancement for themselves. But I think we covered quite a few things. I mean, if people are interested in the book, I would love to have people read it and write me and ask questions, and I'd be happy to talk about it all day long. Those are the main ideas. Other than, I think that when you create space for possibility in your life and in your work, you then have the opportunity to fill that space. And what I'm curious about is, how do people fill that space?
right.
So when somebody reads the book, I would love to know what happens as a result. What's the step that comes from reading the book? They close the book, they say, "That was a great book. Fantastic. Now what?"
Now what?
This conversation has come from you reading the book. That's great. We've created the space for this. This conversation resulted from that. I would always love to hear from people, whether via Instagram, my website, LinkedIn, all of those different routes, to hear what you created with the space that was afforded to you and opened up to you through the possibilities that happen from the ideas in the book.
So where can people buy the book?
People, of course, can find it on Amazon. It's available there. If you want a signed copy, they're available through me, of course, gregbennick.com. You can reach out to me through gregbennick.com. But it's also on bookshop.org, I'm pretty sure, which is a website that has independent booksellers listed.
Mhm.
You can order it from any bookstore. So if you have any bookstore can order it, because the distribution network through Wiley, my publisher, is pretty extraordinary. So any bookstore can order it if it's not on the shelves.
Yeah. But I would encourage anybody who wants an actual physical copy to go to bookshop.org because that is, the local bookshops, and it's not the big box companies that do that.
I love it.
So well, Greg, thank you so much for joining us. I really do appreciate it. I got so much out of the book, as you can tell. I got a new movie to watch on top of everything else.
I'm so glad.
I'm going to learn how to juggle.
It's great.
But
That's what I wanted. That's why I wanted something for everybody in there, and I really appreciate it. And people can reach out to me through gregbennick.com, GregBennick.com, and of course via social media if you like. But be in touch anyway. Any listener, I'd be happy to hear from you anytime.
Yeah, I'll put all those links in the show notes for everybody. But again, thanks so much, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks so much, everybody, for listening, and thank you.
Be sure to visit speakingwithconfidencepodcast.com to join our growing community and register for the Formula for Public Speaking course. Always remember, your voice has the power to change the world. We'll talk to you next time. Take care.
I hope you enjoyed the latest episode of Speaking with Confidence. Give us a review to tell everyone why you love the podcast. You can also download, like, and share the podcast with friends. Be sure to visit formulaforpublicspeaking.com and sign up for the Formula for Public Speaking course. It's a step-by-step system to help you become the confident and powerful speaker you've always wanted to be. We'll see you next time. Take care.